Welcome to the Monday edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberley Hoeppner, and today is December 17th, 2018. When we're not here, you can always get our information by going to 1-800-472-0391 or on the internet at weather.gov/Alaska and just click on the area of your choice. Remember, if you ever have any comments or questions, feel free to email our TV lead at david.snider@noaa.gov. Now let's go on to the weather topics of the day. We're looking over at the west coast here from the Chukchi Sea coast all the way down through the Bering Strait. There are some northerly gusts up to 40 to 50 miles per hour, reducing visibilities down to a half a mile at times and blowing snow. So these conditions are going to continue through around 3 p.m. on Tuesday. So be on the lookout if you're in these locations that you will have some travel difficulties in that region. Now let's take a look at the weather systems that are moving the weather across the state. You can see some upstream flow here of moisture moving to the inland, but the main focus for now is across the western waters. We do have one low pressure system that's bringing a disturbance there across the central Aleutians. Now, a more organized and more powerful storm system is just to the southeast of our state right now. The low center is just off of the Dixon entrance here, and if I put this into motion, you can see how this progressed through the day. Now, it's on an uphill trend, but on the backside of it as well, we do have another disturbance. So we do kind of like two low centers in a very short distance. We did see some breaks in the snow activity, mainly along the eastern areas of the state, but we have a broad, long trough axis across the central interior through the western areas of the Gulf. That's bringing some mainly rain showers across the coastal locations with snow along the backside of the trough, extending all the way from the North Slope locations. Now, if you wanted to see a lot of snow, the big winner was locations around Whittier, where they saw between 20 to 30 inches during the last 24 hours. Overall, for the south central locations, between 2 to 5 inches, while over across the southeast, they are seeing some rain and gusty winds, with the winds expected to be gusting between 40 to 50 miles per hour as this low pressure system lifts through the overnight hours. Now for the west coast, a very tight pressure gradient here, bringing cold air advection along snow showers, so blowing snow conditions, with increased winds expected for the Alaska Peninsula, northerly flow along with some snow shower activity. Now a break between these two systems as a ridge heads up towards the central Aleutians with that disturbance riding right out ahead of it. So for the overnight hours, expect the areas of the Bering from the central west to see a little break from the precipitation, while the eastern areas will be ongoing snow, blowing snow across the Bering Strait locations. For the interior, some light snow shower activity will continue. Only between 1 to 2 inches is expected from the northern Brooks Range south towards the middle and lower Tanana valleys. Expect about 1 inch for the overnight hours. Now, low pressure across the southeast will bring a mix of rain and snow, mainly snow in the higher elevations, with rain for the eastern areas of the Gulf extending up towards Prince William Sound. That cold air advection stays on the backside of this, so any precip, which will be on the lighter side, will be falling as snow. Kodiak will also possibly see a snow shower or two in the western Gulf waters. Now, as we head through Tuesday, this low pressure system is taking more of a north and westerly track, bringing continued rain for the southeast. A colder air mass will be sliding in on the south side of this low pressure system, so all snow along the western areas of the Gulf. This tight gradient on the backside of the low is going to bring some very gusty winds across the Alaska Range here, the western half of the Alaska Range at least, through the Cook Inlet and down towards Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait locations. Very gusty northerly flow between 40 to 60 miles per hour in gap locations. Now across the interior, expect snow to continue over towards the west coast as well. Another 1 to 2 inches can be expected through your Tuesday. A little bit lighter activity across the northeastern slope, so a little bit quieter conditions there. The Alaska Peninsula will see winds begin to taper down during the afternoon on Tuesday. Now expect another low pressure system to be sliding into the western Aleutians. That's going to be bringing rainfall towards the central Aleutians during the day on Tuesday. Now the shift in the pattern continues, and this low pressure system out to the west is really going to be modified with cooler air moving in along the system. The low pressure system to the south will bring rain, and the rest of the Bering will moderate over to snow. Gusty conditions are going to be developing along the occluded frontal boundary, which kind of gets overran with the next cold front coming through. So just thought I'd put the cold front across there just to indicate that we'll probably see all snow with possible gusty and blowing snow for the Pribilofs for Wednesday. So that'll be something to watch. Now for the interior areas on Wednesday, it should be a little bit drier along the west coast, but with the upper level waves rotating around the broad upper low, that's going to be over the Gulf. Expect that light snow shower activity to continue with a rain and possibly a snow mixed in across the inner channels there as a cooler air mass comes around. Also a chance for isolated thunderstorm with greater instability as the next cold air mass pushes over to the eastern areas of the Gulf. All right, temperatures for today warmed up to into the mid-40s, especially for Annette, seeing 45, 46 degrees. Along the coastal locations for tomorrow morning, expect a wide range from 17 degrees over at Kodiak into the lower 30s across Prince William Sound and into the upper 30s mainly for your Tuesday morning temperatures for the southeast. The coldest temperatures, of course, along the Arctic Valley near 20 degrees and below. Along the north slope as well, between 10 to 20 degrees below. And that's pretty much going to be the trend for all of the southwest. They saw some very cold temperatures this morning, so very similar temperatures for the west and southwest coast through tomorrow morning. And then across much of the Bering will be just below the freezing mark. As we get into the higher temperatures for Tuesday afternoon, they're going to be a little bit cooler each day for most of the interior locations. Colder air mass is settling across, but we'll see temperatures increasing into the 40s for the western Aleutian chain, that moderating just below freezing for the Alaska Peninsula areas. Now, staying cooler on the backside of the low pressure system for the western Gulf coastal locations, so in the low to mid 20s for the southern tip of the Kenai, and with temperatures mainly in the 20s for the southern mainland. Across the southeast, seeing temperatures rising into the upper 30s to lower 40s. Now for your Wednesday morning, temperatures a little bit cooler across the southeast. We'll see temperatures all across the Gulf ranging from the teens once again into the upper 30s for the southeast. Across the interior locations between 10 to 20 degrees below zero, including the southwest locations. Cooler out there for the Bering, between 20 degrees below, 20 degrees to 32 degrees. For your Wednesday afternoon, climbing back up to near 40 for the western half of the Bering. The Gulf locations will be back up to near freezing or just above for the southeast, and the rest of the state ranging between a few degrees above to 10 to 15 below zero.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, we're going to look across the state, and you can see that in the areas of bluish green colors, there's going to be widespread MVFR conditions across the state. We do have areas of IFR along the northwest coast and along the west coast, and also along the southern tier of the state. Be on the lookout for IFR conditions for the southern channels in the southeast, and then mainly widespread MVFR and IFR across the Gulf waters. Looking at Tuesday afternoon, conditions across the southeast are not going to be as good as the morning. They're expected to go down to IFR conditions, as well as widespread across the northern Kenai Peninsula and the Anchorage Bowl, north across the northwest coast, down towards the northwestern Brooks Range, and also some areas across the central interior look out for IFR conditions, with MVFR being the main theme across most of the state, with IFR also across a frontal area that's out to the west. Now let's take a look at your flying weather for Wednesday morning. We'll see widespread IFR to start your day across the central interior south towards the Kenai and also along the northern Brooks Range up to the North Slope. There's that front advancing across the waters. Otherwise, MVFR conditions are going to be widespread once again. IFR conditions also are going to hug the inner channels across the southeast, with widespread MVFR expected for the Gulf waters in the southeast. Now let's look at the afternoon conditions. We should see some improvement there across the eastern Gulf. However, still hanging on to some IFR conditions along the areas near Skagway and just along the inner channels there. So be on the lookout, mainly MVFR conditions with some improvement towards the Dixon entrance. Across the eastern areas of the state should see some breaking up going to VFR. For the northwest, IFR is going to hang on through much of the western interior locations. Otherwise, MVFR for most of the southern locations, little breaks here and there for VFR conditions for the southwest coast, with MVFR spreading back into the Alaska Peninsula as the next front comes sliding across the central Bering Sea. So look for IFR on that day for St. Paul and St. George locations, and then some breaks along the western waters behind the frontal position. Now let's take a look at your passes in more depth. We'll see Anaktuvuk go from MVFR to IFR on Tuesday, and then for Adigan will be MVFR conditions all day. And looking at Lake Clark and Merrill, looking at MVFR for you. And then Rainy will be MVFR also, and Windy Pass will be in the MVFR category. Isabel will be MVFR, looking for Mentasta to be MVFR. IFR conditions for Tenita, and then we'll see Portage MVFR going down to IFR in the afternoon. Looking at Chilkoot and White Pass, both MVFR going down to IFR during the afternoon. For your freezing levels on Tuesday morning, the white area, the white line is going to be your surface level, which is draped across the coastal locations and well below south of Kodiak Island before it starts moving along the Aleutian chain out there and across the central Bering waters. And then we're much colder with the air mass, so the 2,000-foot level is right there along the northern Gulf with the slow climb to 4,000 feet below the Dixon entrance. Looking at icing possibilities for much of the eastern half of the state with low pressure there up in the northern Gulf. So icing mainly below 5,000 feet, with the western areas of the Bering below 5,000 feet. Conditions for icing tomorrow for the western location mostly. Now here's the amplified jet stream pattern that's across the area. We basically have a near zonal jet stream with a little bit of the influence of the polar jet stream. Amplified pattern with the low pressure to the north. We do have ridging to the south here, and then kind of a split flow pattern as you go over the CONUS United States locations. For your 9,000-foot level on Tuesday, we have the main circulation is going to be a low pressure system in the western areas of the Gulf, ridging across the Bering. A little bit of a pressure squeeze between these two is going to bring a gusty north to northwesterly flow between 50 to 70 knots. So across the southeast, we're looking at the onshore flow 40 knots. At 3,000-foot level, still that 45 knots ahead of this low pressure system in the Gulf. Very strong winds on the backside, 50 to 55 knots, and then lighter wind speeds across the central areas of the Bering. To sum it all up, we do have some turbulent conditions expected, moderate at times, across the southeast as well.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the earth and grows our food. While the sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the sun doesn't stay at the sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. And this is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system is going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Moving on to the marine segment of the show, we'll start off with the ice edge. Looking at the west coast, they are all covered in ice at this point down through the Bering Strait as we have this cold air mass that continues to filter across the northern Bering. We are seeing this growth continue along the west coast, and through the next several days we will continue to see the ice expand towards the south. We also have ice that is developed across the northern areas of the Cook Inlet. Now let's take a look at the southeast and their forecast for tomorrow, Tuesday. We do have a strong southerly flow with winds between 35 to 40 knots out of the south and east directions, south and west directions there. And then we'll see the inner channels, sea heights will be between 7 to 12 feet. To the north, we will see more of a northerly pull offshore, and that's going to be between 15 to 25 knots. So small craft to the north and gales to the south. Seas across the outer waters will be between 17 to 20 feet. On your Wednesday forecast, expect winds to be a little bit down for the northern channels. However, they're going to hang on to those gusts up to 45 knots. We'll see winds primarily out of the south for all locations on this day, south to southwest. And the inner channels will see sea heights between 5 to 6 feet across the outer waters, between 15 to 20 feet. Let's take a look at the northern Gulf and the Cook Inlet. Speedy winds there across the southern Cook Inlet at 45 knots, so gale force for the western and waters and near the Cook Inlet locations. Primarily a north to westerly flow for your day tomorrow, and the seas will be between 1 to 2 feet across the northern Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound locations. Otherwise, a little bit higher, 7 to 11 feet across the Cook Inlet, the southern areas, and the western waters between 7 to 8 feet. Let's take a look at your Wednesday forecast. A little bit calmer on this day, still strong gusty gales near the southern tip of Cook Inlet. Seas on this day will be between 1 to 3 feet across the northern inlet and Prince William Sound locations. Change of wind directions for the northern waters becoming more south to southeasterly into the Prince William Sound location. Let's take a look at the Alaska Peninsula. Here's those speedy northwesterly winds coming through, bring gale force winds with gusts up to 50 knots, especially through bays and passes there along the southern peninsula. Seas on this day will be between 12 to 14 feet overall, with some ice cover there in the Bristol Bay location. Now let's take a look at your Wednesday forecast. A little bit of the wind speeds also coming down across the peninsula. Still keep those higher gale force winds just on the south side of Kodiak Island. Freezing spray is going to be an issue for both Tuesday and Wednesday. Seas on this day will be between 7 to 14 feet, the highest seas across the southern Alaska Peninsula side to Kodiak Island. Shelikof Strait also in the 6 feet range. Now let's take a look at your Tuesday forecast across the Aleutians. We're going to see mainly northwesterly across the eastern chain. As you head towards the west, becoming more southeasterly. Gales out to the west, small craft towards the east. And seas on this day are going to be between 10 to 20 feet with the highest seas out towards your west. Now let me take a step out of here so you can see the eastern chain. So as we head, we're going to see freezing spray on Tuesday. Wednesday, it's possible, but those winds are going to be switching out of the south direction, so less likely to see freezing spray on Wednesday. Seas are still going to be on the higher side, between 10 to 20 feet, and we'll see small craft advisories for much of the area. And let's take a look at your west coast. We'll see strong northerly flow, higher gusts possible, freezing spray issues between 20 to 30 knots. So we're going to see mostly small craft on Tuesday into Wednesday, slightly less speed across the west coast locations, a little bit of a directional wind change to the southeasterly areas as you head towards the central waters, still keeping a gale force there in the northern waters for Wednesday and freezing spray. Now for the north and west coast, looking at a northerly flow for your Tuesday, small craft or brisk wind advisory across the Bering Strait there, freezing spray towards the northern waters in the ice-free waters. Now mostly ice covered, of course, for most of the locations. North wind hangs on and a little bit gustier towards the strait. To recap your forecast, main snow concerns are going to be tonight across the inland locations, with southeast continuing to see rain through your Tuesday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.